And I could not believe my eyes. And I thought to myself, I can understand why they're treating me. After all, I am their friend. I'm a Christian. I am their ally. But why on earth are they treating the Palestinians and the Muslims? These are the enemy. These are the people who were bombing us. Little did I know about the values of the Israeli people. The doctors treated everyone according to their injury. They did not see religion. They did not see political affiliation. They did not see nationality. They treated people like human beings in need. The doctor treated my mother before he treated the Israeli soldier laying next to her because her injury was more severe. I thought to myself, this is unbelievable, but maybe that's the exception. They took my mother to the 4th floor of the hospital. And we were in the room maybe 5 minutes, and I heard all this commotion outside our window. And I went out to see what was happening. And 2 Israeli helicopters had just landed, bringing in Israeli soldiers wounded in Lebanon in the war. And I stood at that balcony, looking at that scene, looking down at the ground. I felt ashamed. I felt embarrassed. I felt out of place. After all, these people are wounded because of the war with my country. I didn't look at anyone around me. There were a lot of people. There were mothers of wounded soldiers, fathers who were in the hospital with their children, nurses. I didn't make any contact with anybody around me. And I kept looking at the floor. And then I felt this tapping on my shoulder. And I looked, and there was this Israeli nurse looking at me, and she said, "You are new here, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes. They just brought in my mother. She's in this room." And she could see the fear in my eye, and she just put her arm around me and said, "Don't worry, we'll take good care of her. Everything will be fine." And the first time in my life, I experienced civilization. I broke out crying. I broke out sobbing because I experienced the compassion and love that I knew, and humanity that I knew that my society would not be able to show their enemy. I knew for a fact that if I was a Jew standing on the 4th floor of a Lebanese hospital, I will be lynched and thrown down to the ground as shouts of joy of Allahu Akbar will echo through the hallways of the hospital and down the surrounding streets. When the Israelis found out that there were Lebanese wounded in Israeli hospitals, they came in bringing presents. They came in extending a peaceful hand. They came in bringing chocolates. They would visit the wounded families and they would say, "What can we do for you? What can we bring you? Our homes are your home. If you need to stretch, if you need to sleep, if you missed bringing something from home, please let us bring it to you." It was unbelievable. I became friends with the families, with the mothers and the sisters of the wounded soldiers in the hospital. One in particular, Rina Potashnik, I'll never forget her name. Her only son, Amir, who was 19 years old, was wounded in the hospital in his eye, and he lost sight of that eye. And she became like my surrogate mother. I spent a lot of time with her because I was with my mom in the hospital for 22 days. And I would go visit Rina, and one day in particular, the Israeli army band came to play songs to lift the Israeli soldiers' souls. They came to play national songs, and I was visiting with her in her room, and they came to play the song, and they stood around Amir's bed. And I felt so out of place. I started walking out of the room, and she started crying, listening to the music. And when she sensed that I was walking backwards, so she wouldn't notice me even leaving the room, she pulls me by my hand, brings me back inside, and she hugs me, and she says, "It's not your fault." And we both stood there crying. And I thought to myself, what a contrast between her, a mother looking at her only child, only deformed child, and still able to love me, the Arab. What a contrast between her and a suicide bomber's mother who sends her only son and daughter to strap bombs around themselves and blow themselves up to smithereens just to kill a Jew or a few Jewish children. I spent 22 days at the hospital. Those days changed my life. Those days changed the way I believe information. I watched television. I listened to the radio because I realized I was fed a fabricated lie. about the Jews and about Israel that was so far from reality. I realized that it was my culture that taught hate. It was my culture that was unable to love and show compassion to their enemy in their time of need, the way the Israelis were able to show compassion to the Palestinians, to the Muslims, to the Lebanese at their time of need. And I realized the difference in values and character between the Arabic society and the Israeli society. And that's basically where the problem stems from. It's a difference in values.
Well, then what happened after your mother finished her treatment in the hospital?
When my mother finished her treatment in the hospital, we had to go back to Lebanon. I was delighted to be back because I missed my father so much. We had been gone for a while. But it was a double-edged sword because I did not want to go back to Lebanon. And the minute we crossed the border, I felt I am crossing back into the gates of hell. And I didn't want to cross. And I remember grabbing onto the barbed wire to the point where it cut the palm of my hand. I was bleeding, telling my mother, crying, please don't take me out of here. I do not want to go back into Lebanon. And she looked at my face and she said, and who's going to take care of me and your dad? I was an only child. And I didn't know what to tell her. I had to go back to Lebanon. And I felt I was being sentenced back to hell. I went into depression. I was very depressed. I didn't want to leave the house. I stayed home. All I thought about was my days in the hospital. Because I left my heart in Israel. I left my heart with people who taught me humanity, who taught me respect for humanity, respect for human life. I was able to see a side to the Israelis that I know for a fact did not exist where I come from. They had respect for humanity that I didn't know of until I went to Israel. They had compassion. They had values. They had principles that were foreign in my culture. I was so depressed, and I vowed that one day I will be back to Israel. Because those are the type of people I want to be like. These are the type of characters I want to adopt. And I ended up going back to Israel 3 years later to work in Jerusalem.
Well, then how did you get back to Israel?
I got a job working as news anchor for World News Tonight in Jerusalem. And it was a dream come true. I never, beyond my wildest dream, ever thought that I will be able to go work in Israel in such a profession that gave me the ability to meet world leaders and be exposed to information and be able to judge information that was not filtered through the Arabic filters and through the Arabic propaganda. I was able to make decisions and learn about situations in the world where I can evaluate and form an opinion, my own opinion, based on factual information without the exaggeration and the propaganda of the Arabs. It also gave me an insight into the Palestinian culture and into the Israeli culture. Because Jerusalem is the pinnacle of East meets West. In Jerusalem, you have the western side of the city where the Jewish people live, and you have the eastern side of the city where the Arabs live. And the contrast is blinding. It really shows you the difference in the culture and in the values of the two people. It also taught me about the exaggeration of the media, the Arabic media, and what truly was happening in the territories. We had friends in Bethlehem, and we would go visit our friends in Bethlehem.